It's wild that we accept this as normal. You get older, and every winter cold hits harder, lasts longer, and somehow costs more. But there's a plant so bitter it makes your mouth pucker for half an hour. And in controlled human studies, it's been shown to shorten cold symptoms and reduce sick days. So why isn't it sitting next to the Dayquil and cough syrup? Because the part that makes it powerful also makes it almost impossible to own. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you'll learn what this herb actually is, what the research really suggests it can do, and the simple way to use it without getting scammed by hype or ignoring real safety limits. Here's the first payoff up front. The plant is Andrographis paniculata, often called kalmegh or king of bitters. And unlike most immune support products that live on vibes, Andrographis has been tested in dozens of randomized controlled trials and summarized in large reviews and meta-analyses involving thousands of patients with common colds and other uncomplicated upper respiratory infections. The consistent finding: people taking standardized Andrographis extracts tended to recover faster and report less severe symptoms than placebo, especially sore throat, cough, and fatigue. That's the claim. Now we're going to earn it. In the next few minutes, we'll cover three things: what's actually going wrong with your immune system as you age, what Andrographis seems to do differently than standard cold meds, and how to choose or grow it in a way that makes practical sense. And quick note, this isn't medical advice, especially if you're older, pregnant, have autoimmune conditions, or take prescription meds. But you can walk away from this video knowing what questions to ask, what to look for, and what to avoid. Now picture the cold you've already had 3 times this winter. Scratchy throat, heavy fatigue, that wet cement in your limbs feeling. You drag yourself to the pharmacy, stare at a wall of boxes, 47 flavors of relief, and every one of them makes the same silent deal with you. We'll make you feel slightly less miserable, but we're not fixing the reason you keep getting wrecked. Here's a myth that traps people. If it's a virus, you just ride it out, and if you're older, it's normal to take longer. Reality is more annoying and more useful. Your immune system isn't one thing, it's a conversation, and when you're young, that conversation is fast and coordinated. A virus shows up, the early warning cells notice quickly, the alarm goes out, the right tools arrive, and the party's over in a couple of days. But as you age, that conversation can get glitchy in 2 different ways. First glitch, it gets slow, like a group chat where half the notifications arrive 2 hours late. Second glitch, when the message finally goes out, the system sometimes overreacts, like a smoke detector that doesn't beep at toast, but screams like a firestorm when you open the oven. That combo, late response plus messy inflammation, is one reason older adults can feel like colds hit harder and drag on longer. Scientists have a name for this bigger pattern of aging immunity: immunosenescence. You don't need the textbook. Just remember the metaphor. The immune conversation gets slower, and the volume knob gets harder to control. Now look at most cold products through that lens. Decongestants? They're basically shrinking swollen pipes to open airflow. Antihistamines? They block certain receptors so your body feels less dramatic. Pain relievers? They turn down discomfort and fever. Those can be helpful, no shade, but they're mostly symptom managers, not conversation fixers. So here's the question you should be asking: is there anything that helps the immune system respond with better timing and less chaos without simply smashing the mute button? This is where Andrographis enters like the weird character in the movie that everyone ignored, until the plot flips. And I'm going to open a loop right now. In a minute, I'll tell you the specific reason a plant with human clinical trials can still be basically invisible in mainstream medicine. It's not a secret cabal. It's something colder and simpler than that: money. But first, meet the king of bitters. If you've never tasted truly bitter herbs, don't imagine dark chocolate bitter. Imagine you bite a small leaf and your mouth immediately tightens like you sucked on a lemon, except it's not sour, it's sharp, lingering bitterness that just refuses to leave. People say it hangs around for 20 to 30 minutes. Why would anyone choose that? Because traditional medical systems, especially in South Asia, treated bitterness like a signal. Not "this tastes bad, so it must be strong," but more like bitter plants often contain protective compounds, and those compounds can interact with inflammation and infection response. And over centuries, practitioners noticed something practical. People who used Andrographis during cold season didn't just feel better. They seemed to recover faster and sometimes get sick less often. For a long time, the West shrugged at that as folklore. No mechanism, no double-blind trials, no interest. Then modern research did what modern research does. It asked, "Okay, show me." One of the early sparks came from clinical testing in Europe using standardized extracts, meaning you're not just chewing random leaves, you're using a consistent preparation. And from there, the evidence base grew, multiple controlled studies, and later, reviews pooling the data. Here's the pattern interrupt. If you've been trained to think herbs equals weak, this is where that idea gets challenged. Because when you pool enough trials, you start seeing signals that are hard to dismiss. Large reviews and meta-analyses have looked at Andrographis for uncomplicated upper respiratory infections and found improvements versus placebo, things like reduced severity of sore throat and cough, shorter duration, and fewer missed workdays in some studies. Not miracle cure, not never get sick again, but clinically meaningful relief, faster. If you like this kind of hidden in plain sight health history where we separate real evidence from marketing noise, subscribe. This channel is basically a flashlight for the parts of nature and history we stopped looking at. Okay, let's answer the big how. Because it's one thing to say it works. It's another to explain why a plant could outperform the average cold aisle product. Here's the simplest way to think about it. Most cold meds are like turning down the volume on a smoke alarm. Andrographis, specifically its best-studied compound, andrographolide, appears to behave more like a thermostat. A thermostat is responsive. If the room is too hot, it cools. If too cold, it warms, aiming for balance. Now, don't get lost in biochemistry. You don't need a map of signaling pathways. Just remember, researchers describe Andrographis as immunomodulatory, not simply immune boosting, but nudging immune signaling toward a more balanced response. In plain language, it may help reduce excessive inflammatory noise while still supporting useful immune activity. And that's important because boosting isn't always good. A stronger immune system is always better. Reality: an immune system that overreacts can make you feel worse, longer. Sometimes the goal isn't stronger, it's smarter, faster when it should act, calmer when it should stop. Now let's close the loop I promised. Why isn't this common knowledge? You might think, if there are randomized trials, why don't doctors recommend it? Here's the boring villain: incentives. A naturally occurring plant compound is hard to monopolize, and modern drug development is built around monopoly windows, exclusive rights that make it financially rational to spend huge sums on trials, approvals, marketing, and distribution. If anyone can grow it, standardize it, and sell it, the big money engine doesn't roar to life. So what happens instead? Companies often chase modified versions, analogs, derivatives, new formulations, anything that can be owned and defended. Not always because the natural version is bad, but because ownership changes the math. This is not a conspiracy, it's a business model. And it creates a weird reality where evidence exists doesn't automatically translate into mainstream adoption, especially when something sits in the gray zone between supplement and medicine. Here are 2 practical actions you can take, and they don't require you to become an herbalist. First action: if you're considering Andrographis as a seasonal tool, look for a standardized extract. That means the label should indicate a standardization, often to andrographolides, so you're not gambling on random potency. Also look for basic quality signals like third-party testing or reputable manufacturers. You don't need the fanciest brand, you need consistency. Pattern interrupt. Buying a non-standardized herb is like buying coffee with no roast date, no origin, and no caffeine info. Could be great, could be dust. You wouldn't know. Second action: treat this like a short-term cold season strategy, not a daily forever habit. In many studies, people used it around the time of symptoms, early in an uncomplicated infection, rather than as a year-round megadose lifestyle. Now, safety matters, and this is where you should slow down and be an adult about it. If any of these apply, don't wing it. Talk to a clinician first. You're pregnant or trying to conceive. You have autoimmune disease or take immune-modulating meds. You're on blood thinners or complex prescriptions. You've had allergic reactions to herbs before. Even natural compounds can have real effects, and real effects can interact with real medications. That said, for otherwise healthy adults, standardized Andrographis is commonly used for short periods in cold season in many places. Just don't treat it like candy, and don't replace medical care if symptoms are severe, persistent, or unusual. The cold aisle is designed for repeat customers, not because companies are evil, but because the product category is built on repeat events, multiple colds per year, multiple purchases per cold, and the promise of comfort rather than resolution. And that's exactly why a plant you can grow in a pot feels almost offensive to the system. Which brings us to the reclaim it part, without turning this into a manifesto. If you want the most grounded version of autonomy here, it's this: learn the plant, learn the preparation, and keep your expectations sane. Andrographis is typically a warm climate herb. It likes sun, tolerates less than perfect soil, and can be grown in containers in many regions during the right season. People harvest the above-ground parts, often around flowering, then dry it away from direct light to preserve constituents. Pattern interrupt. Think of it like home-drying basil, except basil makes your pasta better, and this makes your face regret tasting it. Could a single plant treat your whole household all winter? That depends on plant size, growing conditions, how you prepare it, and how often your household gets sick. So don't lock onto a magical yield number. Instead, lock onto the real benefit. You can reduce dependency on the cold aisle by having a tool that's backed by human trials and doesn't require a pharmacy run. And if growing isn't your thing, fine. Using a reputable standardized extract is still miles more rational than buying immune gummies that are basically sugar with fairy dust. Let's close the last open loop. Is this just ancient tradition dressed up as science? No. The tradition pointed to a candidate. The science tested it. And while results vary by study and product, the overall body of evidence is strong enough that Andrographis keeps showing up in serious discussions of herbal options for uncomplicated upper respiratory infections. That doesn't mean it replaces vaccines, or replaces medical care, or makes you invincible. It means there's a credible tool sitting outside the mainstream spotlight, because the spotlight follows profitability, not necessarily the most broadly accessible solution. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever tried Andrographis or any bitter herb for colds? Did it help, do nothing, or make you feel worse? Drop your experience in the comments because real-world outcomes matter, especially with herbs where product quality varies. If you believe knowledge like this should be tested, preserved, and shared, subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault. Because the truth about health isn't always hiding in a lab. Sometimes it's growing in a pot, and it tastes like it's trying to warn you.